I'd like to start this video off by just congratulating all of you for making it this far into the series. This is the final video where we're going to be finishing up the game completely so that it's ready for export. We'll start by optimizing our level and then creating a few more levels to play through. We'll then create a main menu widget and a credits widget. We'll play test and then we'll prepare for export. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do here is actually adjust a few lighting features in our scene here. As you can see, if we look at some of this lighting, it doesn't look the greatest. We can see this better on our player specifically. It looks like the lighting's just a little too soft and it doesn't really touch the edge of the cube. So to fix this, let's just go ahead and select our directional light here. And in the details panel here under light, we can adjust a few things to make it look a little bit better. What I'm going to do specifically is adjust the shadow bias down to something like 0.3, increase the shadow slope bias up to something like 1, and changing the shadow filter sharpen to either 0.5 or maybe 1 if we wanted to. I think 1 looks nice, but I also think 0.5 might just look a little bit softer just to make it look a little bit better. Obviously, it's not touching the edge of the cube, and we could try to fix this by using the contact shadow length. Like you can see there, that kind of fixes it. From a distance, this kind of goes away. So it works, but it's not really necessary. I think I'll just leave it at 0. It doesn't do enough for me. Now, having messed with these values a little bit more, I think I'm going to leave the shadow bias at 0.25, the shadow slope bias at 0.25, and the shadow filter sharpen at 1. Let's go ahead and build this lighting and see how it looks. I think that's about as close as we're going to get. If we play here, that looks a little bit nicer, so I think we're ready to move on. Of course, you can mess with these values as much as you'd like to make your game look as nice as you want, but for me, this is good enough for now. Now that we've fixed up our level a little bit, let's go ahead and go into levels here, and we're just going to rename this level to level 3 because this is going to be our final level because it already has a lot in here to make it challenging. Let's go ahead and duplicate this level twice. I'm going to name one of them level 01 and the other one level 02. Let's go ahead and open level 1 and you'll see immediately that there's a lot of lighting issues, and the way to fix this is simply just by building the data because there's no build data for these levels. So if we just build it, there we go. And you'll probably get a few of these errors if your levels are as large as mine are. For no importance volume and the sky being large and things like that, these are really not important right now, so I'm just going to leave them as is. It doesn't really matter that much. Let's go ahead and open level 2 as well. Just go ahead and save all. And we're going to do the same thing, and there we go. I'm actually going to work backwards here by starting in level 2. Let's go ahead and change our perspective mode to top view. You can make this a whole new level and change things if you'd like, but I'm just going to make this a little bit easier than level 3 is, and then I'll do the same for level 1. There we go. I think that looks alright. Let's go ahead and save this. I'm going to do the same for level 1. And there we go. I think that looks nice as well. Let's go ahead and save all once again. And now that we have all of our levels set up, we need to do one more thing in each of them, which is tell it which level to go to next. So let's go ahead and change back to perspective mode here and go to the end of our level. Let's just click our win game here in the scene, hit F to focus on it. And we're going to change this next level to the name of the next level. So in level 1, we're going to be moving to level _02. I'm going to save that. Go ahead and hop into level 2 here. Do the same thing. Find our win game, hit F to focus on it, and change this to level _03. And now once we get to level 3, let's find our win game here. We're going to show credits instead of going to another level. Now if we go back to level 1 and play, you'll notice something immediately once we get to the end. We can still see our trigger. To fix this, let's go ahead and go to our content browser, blueprints, and open up our win game trigger here. Go to our viewport, and what I would normally say is to come over here to rendering and enable hidden in game. But the problem is, for whatever reason in this engine version, or maybe this is for all versions, I'm not sure, because we disabled this and then turned it into a blueprint, well now if we change the visibility of this collision box here, you can see this little sprite thing here is still visible, and you can't change the visibility of a sprite component that's inherited. So let's click our collision component here, just enable the visibility by default. We're not going to bother trying to change hidden in game because it's not going to do anything for this little sprite. So instead we're going to come over here to our event graph, and down at the bottom here where we have some space, we're just going to create an event begin play event. We're going to drag in our collision component component here from the left and just drop it onto the graph. And off of this, we're going to set visibility. Let's just hook up the execution pin here. The new visibility is going to be false, and we are going to propagate to children. And what this is going to do is whenever this blueprint is created, it's going to tell this collision component and all of its children to no longer be visible. So if we close this and now we play, once we get to the end, we're never going to see that sprite and we're never going to see that box trigger. We're just going to hit it and move on and show our menu here. And then of course, if we go to our third level here and play, whenever we reach the end, instead of showing a menu, it does nothing right now because we haven't set up a credits menu. So now let's go ahead and go back to our content browser, blueprints, widgets, and we're going to create 2 more widgets here. But instead of creating them from scratch, let's just go ahead and use our win game widget to our advantage. We've already done a lot. We've created a widget, we've set it up pretty neatly, and we've animated it. So we can just use that and adjust things. But first, let's go ahead and open up the win game, and I'm going to change a few things here. What we did was we changed all the alpha values to 0 by default, so we don't see anything in here. But I want to be able to see things to edit them. I just want it to go away when we start the fade animation. So we can do this in the animation itself, but first, before we even select it, let's go ahead and change all of these alpha values back up to 1, so we can see everything as if it just was animated and now it's all showing. There we go. But now, obviously, this is going to cause problems like it did before. So we can come down here to our fade animation, and to fix this, all we're going to do is select everything that's already showing, like this level complete and this next level button. We're going to click on each of these. We're going to bring down the alpha values as long as the animation's selected, and we're going to add a keyframe every time we do that. Just at the very beginning, at 0, 0, we want to add a keyframe where all the alpha values are 0. Bring down the alpha to 0 and add a keyframe. With the button for the color and opacity, bring the alpha value down to 0, add a keyframe. Bring the background color alpha value down to 0 and add a keyframe. Now, whenever it starts, it will immediately drop them all to 0 and then bring them in when they're ready. And that's going to make our lives a little bit easier when we move on here to create other animations, because then we can just click off of that and bring all their values back up and we'll be fine. It'll never affect anything even if they're showing. Now I'm just going to close this here and I'm going to duplicate our win game here by copying and pasting, and we're going to rename this one to main menu. Let's go ahead and open this one up. The first thing I want to do is change the text here. Instead of saying level complete, this is going to say Unreal CUBETHON. Now, of course, the sizing here is a little bit off. Let's just go ahead and change that real quick. This Unreal text is going to be something like 160, and CUBETHON is going to be like 115. And another thing I want to do here is just change this color to some sort of red for the CUBETHON here. That looks nice. And one last thing, for the Unreal text, I actually want to add a padding to the bottom. I'm going to set this bottom padding value to something like -75. I'm also going to bring this next level button up a bit to something like -375. So that way it's just a little bit closer to the text. We're also going to change the text on this, instead of saying next level, to start game. And one last thing, come over here to the hierarchy and let's just rename this next level button to start game as well. Now we can compile and save. This is all we need to do here. We're not going to add a quit button. It's not really necessary. You can if you'd like, but you'll see how to do that in a little bit when we create the credits menu. Our animation is already set up and everything, so that's good to go. Now all we need to do is come over here to our graph, and the only thing we need to change is our start game button down here. We're actually going to get rid of this next level variable entirely, and we're going to just change open level to level _01, because whenever we start the game, we want to start from level 1. We're not going to bother with saving games and loading levels and things like that. We just want to load directly from the first level whenever we start the game. Compile this and save. We can now close this widget. Now let's go ahead and just duplicate our main menu here by copying and pasting and renaming this one to credits. Let's go ahead and open up our credits widget here. Now for credits, this is going to be a little bit different. We're going to first start by changing the start game text here to quit. Take our start game button, change the name of it to quit as well, and we're just going to move this button down to something like -200 on the Y. And now we're going to add 2 things here. First is going to be another piece of text. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to change the size of this text here. First, Unreal, we're going to change to 200, and CUBETHON, we're going to change to 145, actually a little bit less than that, 143 maybe. And next I'm going to change the padding of the Unreal text here to something like -50, maybe even -25. That looks better. And now we're going to add a text value here to our canvas panel. We'll start by anchoring it to the top center, changing the position on the X to 0, position on the Y to 200. Its size is fine because we're going to actually click this little button here to toggle size to content. I'm going to set that to true. And of course, change the alignment to 0.5 by 0.5. Let's change the color and opacity down to black. We're going to change Roboto to actually Roboto thin again. The size of this text will be something like 50 safety, and this text is going to say, "Thanks for playing." We can also center the justification, but that doesn't really matter. Next, we're going to do a little bit of extra here to make a little made by piece of text here at the bottom. But to do this, let's first create a horizontal box. Drag this onto the canvas panel here. We're actually going to move these things around. First, this "Thanks for playing" text is going to be all the way up here right above the vertical box. And then this horizontal box here that we just created is going to be right above the button. Now let's look for text again and add 2 pieces of text into this horizontal box. And we're going to also look for a spacer, which we're going to put right between these 2 text blocks. Let's go ahead and select the horizontal box here, and we're going to adjust a few settings here. First, setting the anchor to the top center, changing the position on the X to 0, the position on the Y to 700, and we don't need to worry about the size because we're going to once again size to content. Make sure that's checked, and set the alignment to 0.5 by 0.5 again. Now we can select our text block here, the first text block in the horizontal box. First, let's go ahead and change the color and opacity down to black. We're going to leave it as Roboto bold, but I'm going to adjust this to 25 instead of 24. Not a big change, but it's enough to notice. Let's change the text to say "made by." Let's grab the other text block here. Let's change the color and opacity down to black. I'm going to change this to Roboto thin. Once again, size of 25. And this is going to say Vano dev. But now, as you can see, that looks weird because there's no spacing. That's why we added this little spacer here. And the appearance size, we're going to set on the X to 10. If you don't have this little size option, you can always just use the padding. And there we go. That looks a little nicer. Now that everything's set up, we also need to make these adjustments in the fade animation here. So if you click the fade animation, you can see these things are still showing up, and we want to change that. We also want to change some timings, but we'll get to that in a second. First, let's select our "Thanks for playing" text here. By default, change the alpha value down to 0 and add a keyframe. Select our "made by" text and do the same thing. Alpha of 0, add a keyframe, and same for the little Vano dev text that I added as well. Of course, change these text values to your liking and change everything that everything says, and you can of course just use my example to make your own menus. Now the first thing I want to change here is right after the white screen fades in, I don't want Unreal CUBETHON to be the first thing that fades. I actually want "Thanks for playing" to come in first. Let's go ahead and select our "Thanks for playing" text here at 1.25. Let's just add a keyframe to start it, and then at 1.75, let's add another keyframe with the alpha at 1. And then at about 2.25 is where I want Unreal CUBETHON to start coming in. So let's go ahead and select our Unreal CUBETHON text here and move it over to 2.25. You can just highlight these keyframes here and move them as necessary. I'm also just going to adjust this timing here. Also, you can see here that on CUBETHON, it's just setting it to black, and we don't want that. We want this to be a red color now. So let's go to the end where this keyframe is finalized, select our color and opacity, and change it to this red color that I wanted before. And now we can add a keyframe and it will replace the black color with the red color. So now when it fades in, it will fade in red instead. There we go. I think that looks nicer. I adjusted the way that it came in a little bit because then at 3.25 is when I want the "made by" Vano dev text to come in. So let's just go ahead and select "made by," add a keyframe with its alpha still at 0, and then at 4, I will add a keyframe where it is at 1 on the alpha value. And at 3.75, we'll just go ahead and add a keyframe for the Vano dev text here, and at about 4.25 is where I will set it at 1 on the alpha value. And then finally, at 4.5 is when I will take that background color and color and opacity of the quit button and start it and then finish it at 5 seconds. We can now watch this play out. If we just click off and then hit play at the beginning, it'll fade in. "Thanks for playing Unreal CUBETHON, made by Vano dev," and then it creates the quit button for us. Let's go ahead and compile and save here. Now I'm going to go to our graph, and off of the quit button, instead of opening a level, we're simply going to quit game. We don't need to create any specifications here. We just want to quit the game. So now if I compile this and save this, we can close this and our credits screen is done. One last thing we should do here is open up our main menu again, go into our fade animation here and find where it fades in CUBETHON because we need to change this text value to red. So red at the end, the final keyframe where it's done fading in, we're going to change this to our red value that we had before and add a keyframe to replace it. And now it will fade in like that instead. Compile and save. And once again, close this blueprint. Now, obviously, if we play right now, nothing else is going to happen. So we need to set these things up. Come over here to blueprints. Let's open up our game instance here. And off of the show credits, we're going to do something very similar to our win game function here. We're going to create a widget, connect this up here, and this is going to be our credits widget, which we're going to add to viewport. And now one thing that I forgot to add before was our game has ended variable here, because once we win the game, we don't want to be able to end the game again. So if we somehow hit an obstacle off in the distance, seconds or we fall off the level after we've already won the game, we don't want to restart the level. We want to wait for player input. Let's go ahead and drag our game has ended variable in here and set it. Connect this up to the end here and set it to true. And we're going to do the same thing when we show the credits. Drag this in, set it, connect it up, and make sure it is true. But now, because this is a game instance, we need to reset this once we start a level. The best way to do this is come into our widgets here, open up our win game, and when we click next level, let's scroll down here and view our on pressed button. Whenever we open this next level, we need to make sure that we tell our game instance that we're actually able to play again. So let's get our game instance. We're going to cast to our BP game instance, connect this up here just like we did every other time before. And then we need to set that variable that we had, game has ended, to false. I'm just going to go ahead and copy all of this information here, compile, save. And we're going to do the same thing on the main menu here in the graph. Whenever we open up this level, I want to make sure that it tells the game instance that the game has not ended and we're actually able to play. So let's compile and save. And now we have one last thing to do here, which is actually come back to our levels folder and we're going to create a new level. Let's go ahead and just right click, create a level. This is going to be a blank level by default. We're going to name this main menu. Now if we double click on this, go ahead and save it. And as you can see, it's completely empty. But the first thing I want to do here is come to our world settings, which if you don't have this open, you can come to window, world settings. We're going to add our game mode override here, which is our GM_player. So that way it'll never create the random sphere in our scene, just in case we see that at the beginning. Now let's go ahead and open our level blueprint. So come up here to blueprints, open level blueprint for our main menu scene. Because whenever this scene is created, we just want to use the event begin play here to create that widget and add it to the viewport. So let's create widget, change it to our main menu widget, and add it to the viewport. That's all we need to do. Go ahead and compile and save. Close this blueprint here. And now if we play from our main menu level here, you can see it immediately creates our widget. And there we go, Unreal CUBETHON, and start game. We can start game, play through it, get to the end of our level. Once we beat it, level complete, we can hit next level and play. And if we bump into something, it'll restart from the current level. Same thing if we fall off the map. If we get to the end of our stage here, we can go to the next level again. And then finally, if we beat our last level, instead of showing what we did every other time, it says, thanks for playing Unreal CUBETHON made by Vano Dev. And then it presents a quit button for us. If we hit that, it'll close the game. And with that, you've now officially created your first game in the Unreal Engine. Let's go ahead and drop down this menu here and just use this in standalone mode. This is what it will be like if you export the game. And if we go into full screen here, we can start the game. And as you can see, there are some weird things. Like for me, it's running at a really fast frame rate, so it's kind of choppy, and I don't really like that. So I'm going to mess with some values in our player actually, just to finish things off, because I don't really like the way that we set up our player movement having to multiply times the delta seconds, just because that seems to cause more problems than it solves. So I'm just going to remove this here, which is going to cause a few more problems for us, having to adjust a little bit. Of course, you don't have to do this. This is just something I wanted to mess with to see if it might work better. I'm going to do that for both of these. If I compile and save this, I'm just going to play this in our selected viewport again. We're going really fast, so fast that we skipped everything there. So of course, with this change in place, I had to make a few adjustments to our forward force, our sideways force, and our player's linear dampening. So the static mesh component now has a linear dampening of 2. Our forward force is now 2.5 by default, and our sideways force is now 4 by default. So now if I just save all, we need to go to each level and select our player here because we have it defined in each level. So let's go ahead and just change these back to their default in each level. And now that we've found a speed that works for us, we can go into our player blueprint here and we can actually disable the visibility of our forward force and sideways force. These don't need to be publicly editable anymore because we've already found the force that works for us. Let's go ahead and compile and save, hop back into our main menu here, save all. So if we go into our standalone game here, it should run the same as it does in the editor. We can go ahead and start the game, and there we go. That feels so much better. It's running a lot smoother, and it'll run the same on every device now. This was an issue I ran into at the beginning because it seemed like the right thing to do, but now it looks like it runs better without. Of course, we could do little things here, like if we came into our player, we could add an event here when we hit the escape key, we quit the game. So if I compile this, save this, and close it. If we come into our standalone game here, by default, you can't just hit escape and close the game because it's not a function that we set up. But now that it is, it doesn't work in here because our player isn't actually in this level. But if we start the game and suddenly we want to end the game, we can hit escape and it will close the game for us. You can mess with things as as much as you'd like to play around and figure out what works best for you and your game, but congratulations because you now have a fully working game from start to finish. Thank you guys for watching this video and this series as a whole. I'll be adding the project files to the description of this and every video in this series now that the game is complete, so if you were at all struggling at any point, you can always download my project files and mess around with it, see what I did and see what you were doing to see if you can fix any problems you had, or if you just want to see what I did exactly, you can find that in the description below or in any of the other video descriptions as well. Go ahead and leave a comment telling me how you did, and also make sure to tell me what you'd like to see next. I've been debating for a while what series to do next on the channel, or whether or not I want to hop into another series immediately after. I'm still considering some things. It seems that there's a general demand for a shooter game series, so if that seems interesting to you, let me know in the comments below. I've also considered a survival game series. The problem with both of these is they may include multiplayer support, and that's something that I'm not super skilled at, but either way, if that's something you'd like to see, let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you guys for the incredible support that you've given me throughout this series, and I hope to see you in the next one.